As we study the life of Moses, it might be helpful to look at some of the places where his story plays out in the ancient world. As we look at where Moses lived and where his ministry took place, it's recorded in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Let's take a look and so we can give you some of the background of that story. The story begins in Exodus chapter 1. We see the children of Israel are located in Egypt. Now, leading up to that, how they got to Egypt is Genesis tells us how Abraham came to live in the land of Canaan. And there he established his family and his grandchildren and great-grandchildren after him. But there was a famine in Canaan, and so his clan, the clan that came out of Abraham, had to go to Egypt in order to find food. Now, when they got to Egypt, they lived in the land of Goshen. This small group of 75 people arrived in Egypt. They settled here, and over the course of several hundred years, they grew into a mighty nation of several million people, actually, and they're living in this land. Here you can see along the Nile River, and in Exodus chapter 1, where it describes how Moses' life was saved when his mother put him into a basket in the Nile to save him from the marauding soldiers, that's taking place right here along the Nile River. In the story of Exodus, it doesn't tell us much detail about Egyptian life and the geography of Egypt at the time, but the Egyptians lived all along the Nile River, up here, up and down the Nile River, and apparently the Israelites were involved as slave labor in helping build the great monuments and building projects of Egypt that many can still be seen today. Well, then we get to Exodus chapter 2, Moses went to visit his people. He started to take an interest in his people, having been raised in the household of Pharaoh, yet he knew that he was a Hebrew, and so he went to visit the Israelites. He saw one of them being oppressed by an Egyptian slave master. He killed the slave master. That crime was found out, and so Moses had to flee, and the Bible tells us in Exodus chapter 2 that he fled to the land of Midian. Now, the Egyptians controlled not only Egypt here, but they controlled all along the Mediterranean coast up into Palestine. And so Moses had to flee somewhere that was outside of the range of Egyptian influence in order to save his life after committing that crime. So he fled all the way over to the land of Midian. Now later, of course, he came back. God led him back in Exodus chapter 3. And chapter 4, and he gathered the people and convinced Pharaoh to let them go. And here's one possible route of the Exodus that you can see. The Israelites leaving the land of Goshen here and traveling eastward across these bitter lakes, the Sea of Reeds, as it's called in the Bible, and traveling down into the Sinai Peninsula. Down here, where Mount Sinai is located, is traditionally seen as the site where God met the people at the mountain, where Moses received the Ten Commandments and God initiated the covenant with the people of Israel. Now, there's other views about where the Exodus took place, but this is the traditional view. And then after leaving Sinai, they went up to the borders of Palestine, of Israel up here, and then because they refused to go in, they wandered in the wilderness then for some 40 years, and eventually the next generation came and was able to enter Palestine here, enter Israel from the east near Jericho. Now hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of the geography, the places where this story took place, and it will help you understand better the nature of Moses and what he was doing and how God used him as you read about Moses in the books of Exodus and following.